The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd heard variations of them my whole life. "You're not a real daughter, Valentina. You're just the second wife's mistake." Rose said it with a dismissive wave of her hand, her eyes flitting to the dinner guests, a practiced smile on her face, like I was a fly buzzing too close to the expensive chandelier. I was 19, standing in the dining room of the house I'd grown up in, and for the first time, the humiliation didn't make me shrink. It solidified something cold and hard inside me. My name is Valentina. I learned early that my existence was an inconvenience. Rose, my mother, had married my father, Jimmy, after his first wife passed. I was born a few years into that marriage, a living testament to a union she clearly regretted. Harmony, my half-sister, was Jimmy's daughter from his first marriage, and she was Rose's golden child. Always. My childhood was a carefully choreographed dance around Harmony's brilliance. While she took piano lessons and equestrian classes, I was learning to clean the house, manage the garden, and balance the household budget in my head. Rose's gaze was a constant, icy judgment. Harmony, 2 years my senior, mirrored that disdain, her laughter always a little too loud when Rose would make a cutting remark about my lack of grace or social aptitude. Jimmy, my father, was a ghost in his own home, a man so conflict-averse he'd simply disappear into his study rather than challenge Rose. He'd offer a weak, apologetic smile in my direction, but it never translated into action. That night, the air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and Rose's expensive perfume. Harmony, then 21, was regaling the guests with tales of her latest European trip, her voice bright and confident. I was clearing plates, a task I'd been assigned since I was old enough to carry a tray. One of Rose's friends had made an innocuous comment about how much I'd grown, how I was becoming quite the young woman. That's when Rose delivered the line, sharp and precise, designed to cut me down to size. Jimmy, then 53, flinched, but he didn't speak. Harmony just smirked, taking a sip of her wine. The guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. It was a familiar tableau. But this time, something snapped, not in a tearful, emotional way, more like a circuit breaker. I finished clearing the table, my movements precise, mechanical. My mind, usually a whirlwind of calculations and logical sequences, felt eerily calm. Upstairs, I pulled out the worn duffel bag I used for school trips. I didn't pack clothes, just my laptop, a few chargers, and the worn copy of The Art of War I'd underlined 100 times. I counted the cash in my old piggy bank, $78, not much, but it was mine. Then I went to the small dog bed tucked away in the corner of my room. My pit bull mix, Bo, was curled up, a warm, solid presence. He was barely a year old then, all gangly limbs and boundless loyalty. He was the only creature in that house who looked at me without judgment. I whispered his name, and he thumped his tail, nudging his head into my hand. "Come on, boy," I murmured. "We're going on an adventure." I slipped out the back door, Bo trotting silently beside me, his leash held tight in my hand. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the stifling heat inside. I didn't look back. There were no tears, no dramatic farewells, just the quiet click of the gate latch. We walked until we reached the bus stop on the main road, a mile from the house. I calculated the bus fare in my head, subtracting it from my $78. Enough for 2 tickets to the city, where a friend from my coding club had offered me a couch to crash on any time. I pulled out my phone, the screen cracked but functional. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing out a quick email. The recipient was Maxwell. He was the family lawyer, a man who always seemed to look at me with a hint of something unreadable in his eyes, unlike the others. I'd seen him at family gatherings, always polite, always distant. I typed the subject line, a quiet declaration of war, subject, my inheritance. The email to Maxwell felt like dropping a single stone into a vast silent ocean. I didn't expect an immediate reply, or even one at all. He was the family lawyer, after all, paid to serve them. But something in his eyes had always hinted at a different kind of understanding. The first few months were a blur of cheap coffee and even cheaper ramen. My friend Leo let me crash on his couch for a couple of weeks. Then I found a tiny windowless room in a shared house near the university campus. Bo, my loyal pit bull mix, was my only constant. He curled up beside me on the worn mattress, his soft snores a comforting rhythm against the frantic hum of my laptop. I was 19, legally an adult, and completely on my own. My $78 vanished quickly. I took on every freelance coding gig I could find online, fixing broken websites, debugging obscure scripts. It wasn't glamorous, but it bought dog food and kept the lights on. Every spare moment, every late night was dedicated to learning. I devoured free online courses, open source documentation, anything that could teach me about cybersecurity and privacy tech. My brain, always wired for patterns and logic, soaked it up like a sponge. I saw vulnerabilities where others saw convenience. I saw data trails where others saw seamless interaction. It was during one of these freelance gigs, a complex back-end overhaul for a small design firm, that I met Audrey. She was 25 then, the owner, and effortlessly vibrant, a stark contrast to my own tightly wound nature. I was hunched over my laptop in her office, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code at 3 a.m, when she walked in with 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Still at it, Valentina?" she'd asked, her voice soft, not judgmental. I just grunted, my eyes glued to the screen. "Almost there." She set a mug beside me. "You know, you don't have to kill yourself. The deadline's not until Friday." "I do," I'd replied, not looking up. "I have to." Audrey didn't push. She just sat on the edge of her desk, sipping her tea, occasionally offering a quiet observation about the design flow. She saw the intensity, the drive, but she didn't try to soften it. She just accepted it. Over the next few months, as I continued to pick up work from her firm, our conversations grew. She'd ask about my projects, my ideas, never prying into my past, but always listening. She saw me, not the damage, and slowly, cautiously, I started to let my guard down, just a fraction. We became friends, her grounded presence a quiet anchor in my chaotic world. Meanwhile, my email to Maxwell hadn't gone unanswered. About 6 months after I'd sent it, a reply landed in my inbox. It was brief, almost coded. "Valentina, received your query. Certain assets previously overlooked may be accessible. Act swiftly. Harmony's trust activation date is approaching. Let's schedule a secure call." M. Riley. It wasn't a confirmation, but it was a lead, a thread to pull. It fueled me, gave my endless coding sessions a sharper edge. I wasn't just building software, I was building a future, a shield. My first major project was Point Zero, a voice privacy assistant designed to scramble vocal biometrics in real time, making it impossible for AI to identify or track individual voices. It was a niche, almost paranoid concept, but I knew there was a market for it. I poured everything into it, my last few dollars, my waking hours, my very sanity. There were nights I'd fall asleep at my desk, Bo curled protectively at my feet, only to wake up an hour later, a new line of code already forming in my head. 2 years after I'd walked out, at 21, Point Zero was ready. I entered it into an open-source security challenge, a relatively small competition, but it offered a cash prize. I needed that cash. I needed it to build, to expand, to stop living on the edge of broke. The day of the announcement, I sat in the audience, Bo tucked under my seat, his presence a warm weight against my leg. When they called my name, I walked onto the stage, my heart a dull thrum against my ribs. The lights were blinding. The host handed me a ridiculously oversized check. I looked directly into the camera, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. I'm not broke anymore. Winning that cash prize was just the first domino. Point Zero, once a desperate project, became the foundation of my first startup. I poured the prize money and every subsequent dollar back into it, hiring a small, dedicated team, mostly other young, hungry developers who saw the same potential I did. The tech world, it turned out, was hungry for true privacy solutions, not just lip service. Within a year, Point Zero was acquired by a major cybersecurity firm for a sum that made my $78 feel like a distant, absurd memory. 2 years after I'd walked out, at 21, Point Zero was ready. Now, a year later, I was 22, and suddenly the world was my oyster. But oysters, I'd learned, often hid pearls of irritation. I didn't just want wealth, I wanted power. The kind of power that made people like Rose and Harmony sit up and take notice, the kind that made them regret every dismissive word, every cold stare. My second venture, a stealth mode data encryption platform, was already well underway. It was even more ambitious, designed to be invisible, impenetrable. While my team worked on that, I focused on a different kind of acquisition, the vineyard. It was called Vino Veritas, a sprawling estate in Napa Valley that Rose and Jimmy had always bragged about. Not that they owned it, of course. They just frequented it, held their pretentious charity galas there, and dropped its name at every opportunity, as if its prestige somehow rubbed off on them. Harmony, at 24, would post endless selfies from its sun-drenched terraces. It was their symbol of status, of a life I was supposedly too common to ever touch. I bought it through one of my newly formed shell companies, an anonymous LLC with layers of legal insulation. The transaction was clean, quiet, no fanfare, no public announcement. I just let words slip, a carefully placed comment to a mutual acquaintance, a casual mention in a tech blog interview about my recent investment in agricultural technology. The reaction was exactly what I'd anticipated. A few weeks later, my phone, a burner I kept for unsolicited calls, rang. It was Harmony, her voice saccharine sweet, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me since I was a child, and she wanted me to do her homework. "Valentina, is that really you?" she gushed. "It's Harmony." "Mom and I heard about the vineyard, Vino Veritas. It's just incredible. So thoughtful of you to invest in something so close to our hearts." I held the phone away from my ear, picturing her forced smile, her eyes probably darting around to see if anyone was watching her play the part of the concerned, loving sister. I was in my new office, overlooking the city skyline, Beau asleep on a plush dog bed beside my ergonomic chair. "Thoughtful?" I deadpanned, my voice flat. "It was a sound investment." "Oh, of course, but it's just so lovely. Mum said, well, she said perhaps we misunderstood your potential. She's so proud, you know. We all are." Rose, now 49, was clearly behind this call, pulling Harmony's strings. I didn't need to respond. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable on her end. I could almost hear her scrambling for another platitude. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fill the void, to justify myself, to earn her approval. I just let her squirm. The power of not needing a response was intoxicating. "Well," Harmony finally stammered, we should catch up properly. Maybe at the vineyard, for a tasting." "Perhaps," I said, my voice still devoid of warmth. "I'll be in touch." I hung up before she could reply. The call left a metallic taste in my mouth, but also a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just about money, this was about reclaiming narratives, about showing them, not telling them. Audrey, now 27, my friend and confidant, had watched my ascent with a mixture of pride and quiet concern. She'd seen the relentless drive, the cold calculation. "Are you ever going to stop, Val?" she'd asked me one evening as we shared a bottle of wine in my penthouse apartment. "You've got more money than you could ever spend. What's next?" World domination? I just smiled, a thin, humourless line. Something like that. She didn't know the full extent of my plan, not yet. She saw the success, the quiet revenge, but she didn't see the full blueprint for creative destruction I was pregnant with. The vineyard was just the appetizer. The main course was far more personal. I was targeting the beach house, their prized coastal property, where Harmony hosted her lavish summer parties, where Rose held court like a queen. It was their ultimate symbol of old money, of inherited privilege. A few days later, an email from Maxwell landed in my inbox. He was 56 now, his replies still precise, almost clinical. The subject line read, "Property list, Lawson Estate." I opened it, my heart rate steady. The list was extensive, detailing every asset tied to my father's family. Most were already accounted for, transferred to Harmony's trust or sold off. But one entry made me pause. It was the beach house. And next to it, in faded script, was a name I hadn't heard in years, William Morrison, Rose's first husband. The email contained a cryptic note. An addendum, long forgotten, everything to Valentina. The email from Maxwell, detailing the forgotten addendum from William Morrison, Rose's first husband, was a blueprint. The beach house. It wasn't just a property, it was the physical embodiment of everything I'd been denied, everything Harmony had been handed. It was their summer kingdom, their symbol of unearned privilege, and now it was within reach. "It's a long shot, Valentina," Maxwell had cautioned during our secure video call. He was 56, his face etched with the kind of weariness only lawyers who deal with entrenched family money acquire. William Morrison set up a rather unusual trust. He was eccentric. The addendum stipulates that if certain conditions were met, specifically if Rose remarried and had another child, and if that child was demonstrably estranged from the family by their 19th birthday, then the property would revert to you. It was designed to ensure his assets, which he felt Rose had squandered, would eventually go to someone who truly needed them, or to spite her, depending on how you look at it. It's a legal labyrinth, but the path is there. I was 22 when I told Maxwell to proceed. Patience was no longer a virtue, it was a weapon. The long game wasn't just a phrase, it was a year of meticulous legal work. Maxwell, with his quiet efficiency, navigated the archaic clauses, unearthed forgotten documents, and untangled decades of financial obfuscation. He was a silent partner in my calculated vengeance, his motivation still a mystery to me, but his results undeniable. While Maxwell worked, I continued to build. My second startup, the data encryption platform, was thriving, quietly dominating its niche. The money flowed, but it felt abstract, a score on a game I was winning. The real victory was in the dismantling piece by piece of the world that had cast me out. A year passed quickly. By the time Harmony's annual summer kick-off party at the beach house rolled around, I was 23. Harmony was 24, and Rose, 49, would be there, no doubt holding court. It was the perfect stage. "Are you sure about this, Val?" Audrey asked, her brow furrowed with concern. She was 27, and her grounded nature was a constant counterpoint to my own relentless drive. We were sitting on the terrace of my penthouse, Beau snoozing at our feet. "You've won. You have everything. Why keep poking the bear?" I looked out at the city lights, a million tiny fires. "Because the bear needs to know it's been declawed." "But at what cost to you?" she pressed gently. "This anger, it's a heavy thing to carry." "It's fuel," I said, my voice flat. "It's what got me here, and I'm not done. Not until they understand what they did." Audrey sighed, but she didn't argue further. She understood in her own way that this was something I had to see through. The day of Harmony's party, the Pacific Coast Highway was choked with luxury cars. I arrived in a nondescript black SUV, Beau in the back seat, his head occasionally resting on my shoulder. The gates of the beach house were wide open, a steady stream of guests in designer swimwear flowing in. The air hummed with pop music and the clinking of glasses. I parked down the road and walked up, my steps deliberate. The security guard, a burly man I recognised from previous family events, was checking names off a list. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly when he saw me. "Miss Valentina," he stammered, clearly surprised. "Evening, Mark," I said, my voice calm. "I believe I'm expected." He frowned, scanning his clipboard. "I don't see your name on the list, ma'am. This is a private event." I didn't argue. I just pulled out a folded document from my purse and handed it to him. It was the deed, freshly stamped, my name bold and clear as the sole owner of the property. He took it, his eyes scanning the official seal, then my name. His face went from confused to pale. He looked up at the house, then back at me, a dawning horror in his eyes. He pulled out his radio, his voice crackling with urgency. "I need to speak to Miss Rose or Miss Harmony immediately. It's urgent." Inside, I could see Harmony's silhouette against the large windows, laughing, oblivious. A few minutes later, Harmony herself, followed by a confused Rose, came striding towards the gate, their smiles fading as they saw me. "Valentina?" "What are you doing here?" Rose demanded, her voice sharp. I simply held up the deed, letting them see my name on it. Harmony's jaw dropped. Rose's eyes narrowed, then widened in disbelief as Mark, the security guard, stammered, "Ma'am, Miss Valentina Lawson. She's the owner of record, as of this morning." The music inside seemed to falter. Guests started to notice the commotion at the gate. Rose snatched the deed from my hand, her face contorting in fury as she read it. "This is impossible. This is a trick." "It's not a trick, Rose," I said, my voice cutting through the rising murmur. "It's a legal fact. You're trespassing." Harmony, her face white, started whispering frantically to Rose. The party atmosphere evaporated, replaced by confused whispers and pointing fingers. Rose, usually so composed, looked utterly undone. She didn't order anyone to leave. She didn't have to. The humiliation, the sudden public unravelling of their carefully constructed facade was enough. Guests, sensing the shift in the air, began to make their excuses, grabbing their bags, their laughter replaced by awkward goodbyes. The party, so vibrant moments before, began to bleed out, leaving only the stunned silence of my family. Later that week, Maxwell called. "Rose is asking questions, Valentina," he warned, his voice tight. "She's trying to find out who's behind the legal challenges. She's hired her own investigators. She suspects someone is targeting her, but she doesn't know who or why." "Let her investigate," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "She'll find out soon enough." The next morning, a letter arrived at my penthouse. It was a heavy cream envelope, addressed in elegant, looping script, handwritten. I recognised Rose's hand instantly. I tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Her words, stark and chilling, stared back at me. "I forgive you. Come home." "I forgive you. Come home." The words on the page were a twisted joke. Forgiveness? From her? The woman who had systematically chipped away at my self-worth for 19 years, who had called me a mistake, who had allowed her golden child to treat me like dirt. The audacity was breathtaking. I crumpled the letter, the expensive paper crinkling in my hand, and tossed it into the waste bin. There was no coming home. Not to that house, not to those people. My home was now a penthouse overlooking the city, and my family was Beau, and soon Audrey. I was 23. The beach house acquisition had been a public humiliation for Rose and Harmony, a quiet victory for me. But it wasn't the final blow. I had one more act planned, a grand finale designed to not just reclaim assets, but to shatter their carefully constructed facade entirely. My wedding. Audrey, 27, had proposed to me 6 months prior on a private island getaway, a surprise trip she'd meticulously planned. She'd known about my past, about the emotional scars, but she'd never tried to fix me. She just loved me, fiercely and without pity. Her proposal wasn't a grand public spectacle. It was just us, under a canopy of stars, her voice soft as she told me I deserved celebration, not just survival. It was the first time I truly felt seen, truly felt loved without condition. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. Now, planning the wedding became another project, another meticulously curated event, not just to celebrate love, but to send a message. We chose a stunning resort on a private island, far enough to be exclusive, close enough to be accessible. Every detail, from the minimalist floral arrangements to the custom-designed invitations, was chosen with precision. Audrey handled the aesthetics, her design firm's expertise shining through. I handled the guest list, the logistics, and the hidden agenda. The invitations went out 3 months before the ceremony. Sleek, heavy cardstock, embossed with our initials, and in a separate, smaller envelope tucked inside, a custom RSVP card, not a real one. This one was a photo. A high-resolution, perfectly framed shot of Maxwell and me standing in front of the beach house, signing the final transfer documents. My name, bold and clear, on the deed, and embedded in the QR code on the back of that fake RSVP card, a digital breadcrumb, a link, not to our wedding website, but to a carefully constructed media leak. It contained irrefutable evidence of Rose and Harmony's illegal tax filings tied directly to the vineyard. Years of creative accounting, hidden offshore accounts, and undeclared income, all meticulously compiled by Maxwell. The kind of information that would attract the attention of Forbes, the IRS, and every major news outlet. I hadn't told Audrey the full extent of this final act. She knew I was inviting them, knew I wanted them to witness my happiness, but she didn't know the depth of the trap I was laying. One evening, a few weeks before the wedding, she found me in my study, hunched over my laptop, reviewing the final details of the press kit. Beau was asleep on the rug. She picked up one of the fake RSVP cards, her brow furrowed. "Val," she said, her voice quiet, "what is this? This isn't what we designed." I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I hadn't meant for her to find it. "It's a detail." She turned the card over, her eyes scanning the QR code, her designer's eye immediately picking up on the subtle anomaly. She pulled out her phone, scanned it, and her face went pale as the link opened to a dummy page, a preview of the damning financial documents. "Valentina!" Her voice was sharp, laced with a hurt I rarely heard. "What is this? Tax fraud? The vineyard? You're going to expose them at our wedding?" I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "It's not at our wedding, Audrey. It's because of our wedding. It's the final piece. They need to see it. They need to know who did this to them." "This isn't just revenge, Val," she said, her voice rising. "This is nuclear. This is going to ruin them. And you're using our wedding as the weapon? Our celebration? What does that make us?" "It makes us powerful," I retorted, my own voice hardening. "It makes me safe. They tried to break me, Audrey. They told me I was nothing. They stole from me, emotionally and financially." This is justice." "Justice," she scoffed, throwing the card onto my desk. "Or just more of the same pain, just aimed in a different direction? I love you, Val, but sometimes I worry you're letting this consume you, that you're so afraid of being loved out of pity, that you're pushing away the real thing with all this calculated destruction." The words hit a nerve, a raw, exposed one I rarely acknowledged. Loved out of pity. That was the core fear, the one I buried under layers of ambition and cold logic. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare question my motivations. You don't know what it was like. Her eyes flashed, but then the anger softened into a deep sadness. No, I don't. But I know what it's like to love you and to want you to find peace, not just more battles. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the glowing screen and the silent hum of my revenge. A few days later, Maxwell called. His voice was unusually strained. Valentina, I need to tell you something before everything goes live. What is it, Maxwell? I asked, my heart suddenly thrumming with a premonition. When Rose first hired me years ago, after your father's first wife died, she specifically instructed me to ensure that William Morrison's addendum would never see the light of day, to bury it, to make sure you never knew about it, helping you reclaim what was yours. It's been my penance, Valentina, for what I almost did. The phone felt heavy in my hand. He hadn't just been a lawyer, he'd been an accomplice, albeit a reluctant one to their initial betrayal. The layers of deceit ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. The day before the wedding, a Forbes journalist named Chris Walton, whom I'd given an exclusive on my journey from $78 to tech success, sent me a draft of his article. The headline blared, "From $78 to Billionaire Bride, the woman who outsmarted her own family." The Forbes headline was a preemptive strike, a public announcement of my arrival. It didn't mention the vineyard or the tax fraud directly, that was for the wedding day, but it painted a picture of a self-made woman who had risen from nothing, hinting at a past of adversity. It was enough to pique curiosity, to make my family's arrival at the wedding less about celebrating love and more about performing for an audience already primed to judge. I was 23, standing on the precipice of everything I had planned. The argument with Audrey, 27, still gnawed at me, so afraid of being loved out of pity. Her words echoed the deepest insecurity I possessed, but the revelation about Maxwell, 56, and his initial complicity only hardened my resolve. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about exposing the rot, the layers of deception that had defined my life. The wedding rehearsal was set for the evening before the ceremony. The island resort was breathtaking, a symphony of white sand and turquoise water. Audrey had poured her heart into the design, creating a space that felt both elegant and intimate. Beau, now a seasoned traveller, was curled at the foot of my bed in our private villa, oblivious to the storm brewing. Rose, 49, Harmony, 24, and Jimmy, 56, arrived in a flurry of borrowed prestige. Rose wore a designer dress that looked a size too small, her smile plastered on, brittle and forced. Harmony, usually so poised, kept glancing around, her eyes darting between the other guests, searching for recognition. Jimmy, as always, was a shadow, his shoulders hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. They were trying to project an image of effortless belonging, but the Forbes article, which had gone live that morning, had already done its work. Whispers followed them like shadows. Everyone knew who I was now, everyone knew their story, or at least the public version of it. The rehearsal itself was a blur of polite fictions. Audrey, ever gracious, tried to make small talk, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. As soon as the formal parts were over, Harmony cornered me near the altar, her voice low and venomous. "You think money makes you worthy?" she hissed, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and fear. "You think this makes you one of us? You're still just that girl, the mistake." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a cold, analytical assessment. She was a mirror of Rose, a product of the same toxic environment that had nearly consumed me. "No, Harmony," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "Money doesn't make me worthy, but it makes me too expensive to insult." Her face contorted, a flash of pure hatred. She opened her mouth to retort, but Rose's sharp voice cut her off. "Harmony!" We need to go. Rose grabbed her arm, pulling her away, her eyes shooting daggers at me. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, I found Jimmy sitting alone on a bench near the beach, staring out at the ocean. He looked smaller, older. "Valentina," he said, his voice raspy without turning. I sat beside him, the silence stretching between us. "Jimmy, I'm sorry," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything. For not protecting you, for letting things happen." The apology, after all these years, felt hollow. Too little, too late. It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender, a recognition of his own cowardice. "You didn't protect me because you couldn't protect yourself," I said, my voice devoid of accusation, just stating a fact. "Rose, she did to you what she tried to do to me." He flinched, a raw, exposed nerve. She was always like that, even before you. She wanted something I couldn't give her, and when I couldn't, she just turned it on you." A memory flashed, sharp and vivid. Rose, screaming at Jimmy in the kitchen, her face contorted, a glass shattering against the wall. He just stood there, passive, accepting. Then, later, her cold, dismissive words to me, a child, about how I was a burden, a disappointment. It wasn't just about me. It was a cycle, a pattern of emotional abuse that had existed long before I was born, and I had simply been the next convenient target. Jimmy wasn't just spineless, he was broken, and he had let his brokenness break me too. "It doesn't matter now," I said, standing up. The past was a dead thing. I had built my own future. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading sadness. "What will you do, Valentina?" I didn't answer. I just walked away, leaving him to his regrets. That night, after the rehearsal dinner, after the last guest had retired to their villa, I went back to my own. Beau was restless, pacing. I checked my phone, then the bathroom, then the balcony. Audrey wasn't there. Her overnight bag was gone. The villa felt too quiet, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. Audrey was gone. Her bag, her presence, everything. The fear, cold and sharp, was a stranger to me. I was 23, a tech mogul, a master of calculated moves, but this was raw, unpredictable. Beau, sensing my distress, nudged his head into my hand, a warm, grounding presence. I spent the night pacing, the perfect wedding plans dissolving into a chaotic mess of what-ifs. Just as the first sliver of dawn painted the sky, a soft click at the door. Audrey. She stood there, her eyes tired but clear, a small travel bag in her hand. My breath hitched. "Where did you go?" I asked, the words a raw whisper. She walked towards me, her gaze steady. "I went to think, Val, to be alone, to make sure I wasn't just enabling you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a delicate antique ring. My mother's. She wore it every day. She told me to only wear it when I was absolutely certain. She slipped it onto her finger. "You deserve celebration, Valentina, not revenge as performance art." Her words, so similar to our argument, hung in the air. But this time they weren't accusatory, they were an offering, a challenge. She wasn't asking me to abandon my path just to acknowledge the cost. The fear of being loved out of pity, the one she'd exposed, still lingered, but seeing her here, choosing me, choosing us, despite the chaos I brought, was a powerful antidote. I looked at her, at the ring, at the unwavering love in her eyes. The meticulously planned revenge, the final, devastating blow, suddenly felt heavy. For a split second I hesitated. Could I let it go? Could I choose peace over vengeance? The image of Rose's cold eyes, Harmony's sneer, Jimmy's passive surrender flashed through my mind. No, not yet. not when they still thought they held any power over me. This wasn't just about them anymore, it was about the girl I used to be, the one who walked out with $78 and a dog. She deserved this. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Let's get married." The wedding ceremony was a dream. Audrey, 27, in a dress that shimmered like moonlight on water, met me at the altar. Her smile was genuine, full of a warmth that slowly, carefully began to thaw the ice around my heart. I walked down the aisle, not just as a bride, but as a queen entering her reclaimed kingdom. The Forbes article had done its job. The other guests, a mix of tech titans, venture capitalists and friends, watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Rose, 49, Harmony, 24, and Jimmy, 56, sat in the front row, their faces masks of strained politeness. They were trapped, forced to witness my triumph. The vows were real, heartfelt. Audrey's hand in mine was solid, grounding. For a few precious hours, the revenge faded into the background, replaced by the pure, terrifying joy of finally being loved. But the plan was in motion. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and champagne flowed, I excused myself, my heart a steady drumbeat. I walked to a private office I'd secured, Beau trotting faithfully beside me. I sat at the desk, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The press kit, meticulously compiled by Maxwell, was ready. It contained the full, undeniable evidence: the siphoned trust fund, the forged dates on documents that transferred my rightful inheritance to Harmony and Rose, the detailed financial trails. It was a legal and financial bomb. I hit send. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with notifications. Maxwell, 56, confirmed the release. Then a flood of news alerts, major networks, financial news outlets, tech blogs. The story spread like wildfire. Chris Walton, the Forbes journalist, had clearly been waiting for this. His network of contacts ensured it hit every major screen. His own history with the Morrison family, whatever it was, had fueled his willingness to expose them. I walked back out to the reception, the soft strains of music and laughter filling the air. Rose and Harmony were near the buffet, trying to engage a prominent venture capitalist in conversation. Suddenly, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones lit up, screens glowing with breaking news. Harmony's phone, clutched in her hand, slipped and clattered to the ground. Her eyes, wide with horror, stared at the headline. Then, a high-pitched, guttural scream tore from her throat. She crumpled to the marble floor, sobbing, her designer dress pooling around her. Rose, her face ashen, snatched a phone from a nearby guest, her eyes scanning the damning headlines. "This is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, her carefully constructed composure shattering. "This is all a lie! It's slander!" But no one cared any more. The whispers had turned into open stares. The guests, once merely curious, now looked at Rose and Harmony with a mixture of pity and disgust. Jimmy, standing a few feet away, looked like he might simply dissolve into the floor. Maxwell, who had been standing quietly near the bar, caught my eye. He raised his glass in a silent toast. "Karma doesn't need fire," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising clamour. "Just patience." I watched Harmony's pathetic collapse, Rose's desperate denials. The victory was mine. It was complete. But as I watched them, stripped bare, ruined, a strange emptiness settled in my chest. The satisfaction was there, yes, sharp and clear, but it felt anticlimactic, like reaching the summit of a mountain only to find the view was just more mountains. I wasn't their bloodline's flaw. I was their karma in stiletto heels. 6 months after the island wedding, the ocean breeze was a constant whisper against the walls of our villa. My villa now. Audrey, 27 and a half, was sketching designs for a new project, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beau, still a young adult at 5 in dog years, stretched out, sun-drunk on the warm tiles. Life was quiet, rich, and still a little angry. The news cycle had mostly moved on, but the fallout for Rose and Harmony was irreversible. The tax fraud, the siphoning of the trust fund, it had all been meticulously documented and publicly exposed. Rose, 49.5, and Harmony, 24.5, were facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits. Their social standing, once their most prized possession, was utterly demolished. Jimmy, 56.5, I heard, had retreated entirely, a ghost haunting the ruins of his former life. Maxwell, also 56.5, had quietly retired, his penance paid. The physical victory was absolute. Yet sometimes I'd catch myself staring out at the endless blue and feel that familiar hollow ache. The satisfaction was there, a sharp, clean cut, but it wasn't the catharsis I'd once envisioned. It was just quiet. Then the letter arrived, another one from Rose. No return address, just her looping script. I almost didn't open it. But the curiosity, a lingering thread of the old obsession, pulled me in. One line. What will you do with everything now? It wasn't an apology, it was a challenge, a final, desperate attempt to exert control, to imply I still needed her validation. She still didn't understand. She never would. Because the real inheritance, the one she tried to bury deeper than any addendum, wasn't money or property. It was the truth Maxwell had quietly unearthed months ago, buried in the same dusty files that held William Morrison's trust details. Rose wasn't my biological mother. My birth certificate, tucked away in a sealed file, listed another name, a woman who had died shortly after my birth. Jimmy had married Rose not long after, and she had taken me in, a reluctant, resentful stepmother. The second wife's mistake wasn't just a cruel taunt, it was a literal truth to her. I was a constant living reminder of a life she hadn't chosen, of a child she hadn't birthed. That was why she had projected her dissatisfaction onto me, why she had hated me with such cold precision. I wasn't her bloodline's flaw. I was a foreign body in her carefully constructed world. The knowledge didn't bring a rush of emotion, just a quiet click into place. It explained everything, and it severed the last invisible thread that had bound me to her. There was no blood debt to her, only to the woman who had truly given me life. I created a foundation in her name, a quiet tribute to a ghost I would never know, but whose existence had shaped my own. As for the vineyard Vino Veritas, the one they'd bragged about every Christmas, I let it rot. The vines withered, the grapes shriveled on the branches. It was never meant to grow anything for me. It was just a symbol, a temporary monument to their downfall. One evening, alone in the reclaimed cellar of the beach house, the one I chose to keep a silent monument to my victory, I poured myself a glass of the vineyard's last undrinkable vintage. Bo lay at my feet, a warm, loyal presence. I raised the glass, not to a reflection, but to the empty space where my tormentors once stood. This isn't revenge, it's blood debt interest, paid in full. And God, was it delicious.